So why do you think that there's still often a separation between the way that we view physical, mental, and emotional states?
Most of the field of medicine is still a war against disease and pain. And I think it's not really the answer. We have to look at it differently. We're not trying to kill disease and pain. We're trying to understand it. So my focus on the whole healing process is understanding what it is that disease and pain are telling us, not trying to get rid of that disease.
The truth is how today's special guest, Dr. Gladys McGarey, describes her message. She herself says she's only been able to truly find her voice since she was 93 years old, but she's been spreading her message about holistic healing for over 8 decades in her work with individuals and pioneering her integrated approach for 5 decades, giving her the name the Mother of Holistic Healing. For the last in the second series of the Make Movement Matter podcast, as Dr. Gladys and I both agreed, technology really is at its best when we have the honour of being able to spend time with and hear the wisdom of someone who has been alive for 103 years and lives on another continent. I was so excited to talk to the inspirational Dr. Gladys and discuss her wonderful book, The Well-Lived Life. We regularly circle back to the importance of our perspective about life in order to find wellness, covering topics like comparison, fear, love, pain, and joy. And I related to my own learning through my experience with pain and learning about myself through the lens of movement. We also talk about her view on looking forward to the future. Dr. Gladys is a storyteller who shares thoughts, wisdom, and experiences that we can all learn from. I thoroughly enjoyed this special conversation and hope you do too. This is the last in the second series, but please do press follow wherever you get your podcasts, as there are a few shorter episodes over the summer break that you might find helpful. And I'm back again with some fabulous guests in September. If you've enjoyed this series, please review, share your favourite episodes, and make movement matter in your own life by heading over to reclaimmovement.co.uk to start moving more naturally. Firstly, Dr. Gladys, it's a real honour for you to give me and my audience your time. So thank you so much.
Well, I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled to be able to do that. Could I have even imagined such a thing when I didn't even know there was such a thing as a telephone when I was growing up?
It is truly, truly amazing. And it gives me such a great opportunity to be able to chat to you, which is I can read your book and then be able to actually chat to you. So I'm so grateful. In my work, I encourage people to rediscover the joy in moving their bodies again for the myriad of benefits that it brings. But for most, it isn't as simple as showing people how to move. I've come to learn that it's equally important to find out how they view their bodies and how movement plays a role in their lives. So their perspective on movement. You mention the word perspective on page 1 of your wonderful book, The Well-Lived Life, which I will just give a little show, which I have absolutely gobbled up. And it contains 6 secrets of true health and happiness. In this conversation, I'd like to dig a bit deeper into your second secret: all life needs to move. Although I know other secrets will come in because they're all interrelated, which is great. But I'd like to start by asking you about the chapter on being stuck, as I find this incredibly accurate representation of how lots of my clients and people in my audience find themselves. So in your over 80 years as a doctor, and described as the mother of holistic medicine, which is an amazing title, when someone came to you over your years with a problem about how they move, how do you approach finding their real blockage, as you called it in the book?
First of all, I have to listen to them. So many patients have come to me and said, this, that, the other doctor told me what to do, but didn't listen to me. Well, I don't see how in the world I can work with a patient if I don't listen to their story. And their story is their own story, and it has to be moving. It is not great movements. It doesn't mean moving from India to the United States. It means moving your toes and your knees and your eyeballs. So
Absolutely.
it's that kind of movement. And along with the 6 secrets that I have, I also have 5 L's that I'd like to. Can I share those now?
Yep, absolutely. Please
Oh,
do.
the first 2 L's are life and love. They have to move. They have to be together. It's like a pregnancy. They're the first, when you're pregnant, everything you eat, the child eats. Everything you think the child thinks. You're one unit throughout that whole pregnancy. But the unit becomes its own person. In other words, we're femifesting in the whole first process, but we begin to manifest when that baby takes its first breath. It moves from the dual product or process into the active part of its life. So it's that there's a split that comes there. But then after that, the third L is laughter. Laughter without love is cruel. It's mean. It hurts. It breaks up families. It causes wars. But laughter with love is joy and happiness. And think of the difference between you when you talk about the other yucky things, and then you talk about joy and happiness. We all kind of put our shoulders back and smile. You can't help it. The fourth one is labor. Oh, too many diapers, too much to do, gotta go to work. Life is too hard. But labor with love is bliss. It's why you're doing what you're doing. It's why I'm doing what I'm doing, and why a singer sings, why a painter paints. It's the very essence of what we do. Laughter with love is not drudgery. You work 10 times as hard doing what you're doing right now as when you were dragging yourself through it. Me too. It's because this is bliss. This is what I want to do. This is who I am. It's that kind of a pull that we have towards life. And so drudgery shifts into bliss. And then the fifth one is listening. Listening without love is empty sound. You don't hear what the person's saying. But listening with love is understanding. So these 5 L's take the whole process of life and move it into its movement. And the movement is love. Its movement in our lives is love.
So when you got to spend time with a patient, you would try to assess where they were on that journey of understanding about the 5 L's when you were looking at whatever it was they came in to see you with?
That came later. That understanding after I had been working with patients and having it happen.
Yeah. And listening is, as you say, is so key. I find over my years of working with people, which is only 5 in what I currently do in my movement coaching, that I would say half of my job is to listen and to understand the whole picture about what is happening with the person that's presented when they come in the door. It's about what's happening, as you say, physically, what they've been discussing as their pathology, the thing that's the issue. And yet usually over time, and I am lucky to have the time with them, I
Yes.
can get to the point where I understand about themselves, and perhaps what's causing that blockage um, in the way they see how they move.
Right. And watching their movements. I had a perfect example of this. I had this good patient, a lovely lady, but she had shoulder pain. And for about 5 years, she kept coming in with this shoulder pain. And we tried one thing, and we tried another thing, and we tried something, and we talked about it, and we did all this. And then this one day, we had gone through the same session that we'd been doing before, and she got up to leave, and she turned around and picked up her purse, which was a huge, heavy purse that she put over her shoulder. And we both sat down and started laughing, because all the time we'd been talking about one thing or another, but I hadn't watched her put her purse on her shoulder and start her pain up, you know. But it's that kind of being aware of what it
Yes.
is that is causing it. And sometimes you can see it, sometimes you can't.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to ask your body about it. And sometimes it's a dream that will tell you. I mean, there are all kinds of ways in which, in my experience, the body really gets to us about what's going on, and lets us know what it is that we need to do about it.
But I think sometimes the body can be talking to us, and yet we ignore it because we don't want to hear what it has to say. And in my experience, when before I was in pain, I actually was having several little moments where I was being told, my body was telling me things are not right. And yet I would ignore that because they were an annoyance. They were getting in my way of my goal, which at the time was to run a half marathon. And yet my body was saying, I'm not ready for this, and we're not in the right place. And so I would get some kind of treatment, and then uh, it would just come back. Everything would always come back because I was suppressing the reality, which was that I am hypermobile and I wasn't strong enough to be running longer distances. And to my detriment, I then was in pain for 4 years. But during that process, I looked back and realized I should have listened to my body because it was telling me something was going to go wrong.
And another wonderful thing, part right on this line, when I tell a patient to go home and rest, that's a time that I'm not telling them to go home and do nothing. I'm telling them to go home and rest. But resting quite often means moving the parts of your body you don't usually think about. It may be moving your eyeballs. It may be moving to try to wiggle your ears or something like that. But some kind of our body. My parents were both osteopathic physicians and all that kind of thing. But we at the table learned how to wiggle our ears when we were kids, And my sister couldn't wiggle her ears. She just couldn't wiggle her ears. I could wiggle mine.
Yeah, I love that thing. That's also the comparison in a family as well, whether you can roll your tongue or not, which is a genetic thing, and yet some children in the same family can do it and some can't, and we all sit there. Those are the best games, aren't they? The best fun. So you've had a really holistic view of health for over 50 years. To my mind, you're decades ahead of your time. Um, but so why do you think that there's still often a separation between the way that we view physical, mental, and emotional states?
Well, I think that most of the field of medicine is still a war against disease and pain. And I think that that doesn't get, well, it gets you someplace, but it's not really the answer. We have to look at it differently. We're not trying to kill disease and pain. We're trying to understand it. So my focus on the whole healing process is understanding what it is that disease and pain are telling us, not trying to get rid of that disease. I mean, what it is, the shoulder bit that I talked about, uh, I could have gone on for the rest of her life and mine, not looking at her, how she carried her purse. So it's some really awareness of our bodies and how the message is to us. My oldest son is a retired orthopedic surgeon, and when he finished his training in orthopedics, he came through Phoenix, and he's on his way down to Del Rio, Texas, to start his practice. And he says, "Mom, I'm real scared." He says, "I'm going to go into the world. I'm going to have people's lives in my hands. I don't know if I can handle that." And I said to him, "Well, Carl, if you think you're the one that does the healing, you have a right to be scared. But if you can understand that it's your job to, with love, connect with your colleague who is the physician within that patient, because that within that patient is the person, the real doctor that is going to do the healing. And so that when you are talking to the patient listens to that. But the part that's really taking it in is that colleague of yours who's within that patient, who takes it and says, "Yes, this is what we can do." And then that's what the patient does, and the healing begins. So it's you are not the one who's doing the healing. So don't be afraid of the responsibility that comes with the transference of the understanding of what it is that you're doing, and watching the patient heal.
So you're giving the patient the agency over their own situation.
Right.
Yeah,
Right. I have another story along this line. Sometimes these stories illustrate things better than words.
absolutely.
I have a wonderful colleague who's a psychiatrist here in town, and just a really good guy. Been friends for years. And he's still working with the University of Arizona Medical School. So he talks to medical students and works with them. So he told me a while back, he had a student who was waiting for him at the door of one of the patients. And he came up and he said, "Okay, let's go in." And she says, "Oh, we don't have to." And she had the chart in her hand. And he said, "What do you mean we don't have to?" And she says, "He has Alzheimer's. He won't understand anything." And he said, "Now, wait a minute." He said, there's more than one person in that room. He's also got his wife in that room. And he may not be able to respond to what we're doing or what we're saying, but she will. And she'll take it all in, and she'll interpret it with love into what it is that is the way she can work with him, and the whole process goes on. But it's not something that we can't do, because we also have to go and touch them. Now,
Lovely.
somehow in her training, that particular aspect of the doctor's place in this whole picture was being left out. So it's so important that we understand that we are moving parts of the whole universe that have to keep moving with love in order to chart other parts of the universe to keep moving with love. It's the way life has to work.
And
Oh, and I
what you
got a story I got to tell you. Okay.
I was just going to interject and just say that so the things that you've described are basically basic fundamentals of human interaction:
Yes.
listening, caring, and touching. Lots
Yes.
of things that, in a way, are sometimes lost in our modern society, and yet they're absolutely key to make connection and to help people to have agency over their own situation, because you're communing.
Yes. Each one of us has that, So, yeah, the story I want to tell is that we had a wonderful friend all through, he was a young man and he grew up and he spent time at our home, ate at our table and all of that kind of thing. We really loved James. And then he moved into dementia. And so we found a nice place for him to be, and we were sure he was taken care of. And this one day, I went to visit him in the home, and I had brought a little plant, just in a little pot that had, it was just a little green plant. It wasn't anything particular at all. And I came in and I said, James, now he's not paying any attention to what I'm saying. Here's a plant for you, and it's going to love you. And but I'd like for you to take care of this plant because it's going to need love. And so, I'm just talking this way. He's not listening to anything I'm saying. At least I can't see that he is. And so I give him the plant and I put it in the window and I show him how to water it. And then I leave. And I come back a week later and he meets me at the door and he says, magic, magic. And I said, what? He says, look. And he takes me over. He says, box. And he takes me over to the air conditioning box. And he says, push this button. Everything cool. Plant loves cool.
Ah!
And then he says, push this button. Everything bad. It's too hot. Plant hates hot. And there he was. And I was so happy. Of course, it's magic. Of course, the whole process. But that little plant was able to get the message across to him, which what else could, And I was so thrilled.
I'm sure
I'm
that's
so,
amazing.
it's magic. It's magic.
That's just amazing, and it just shows about your other story about when the doctor wasn't even going to address the patient, even with the wife there.
Right.
That you never know in that situation, what is being listened to, what's being absorbed, and that's a bit like all conversations, isn't it? About the importance of thinking about who is around us, and no, you never know who's listening in what way, and what a wonderful outcome that was.
Yeah.
Superb.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk to you a little bit about joy, because I don't think it's a concept that I had even thought about before I had my pain, and it was a real tool for me to rediscover an element of my life that had perhaps gone missing for a while. It had been present in many ways because I had 3 wonderful children that I was bringing up and so on. But I hadn't really found connected with it in myself, and it's something that you talk about a lot in your book. And I think a lot of people, I think it's a great way of helping people rediscover um, the best part of moving, because we can really find joy
Uh-huh.
in the ways, in certain ways we move, when we find ways that light us up. And I was wondering if you would talk a little bit about your experience of how joy can help people to reconnect with movement.
Oh, well, just think about laughter. When you laugh, your diaphragm tickles the adrenals. Now, fear and hate sit or arise from the adrenals. I mean, these are the chakras I'm talking about.
Mm.
And so the adrenals can really be the moving factor that takes you into the darkness, but they can sure move you out of it too, because when you're laughing and the diaphragm tickles the adrenals, you can't help but giggle. I mean, if you see a little child giggling, it's very hard not to giggle with them.
Infectious,
It's
yes.
that reaching past the void, which is there if we allow it. But if we try to reach back over that and reach into the essence of what it is that this other being is doing and saying, it tickles your adrenals.
And then part of that is then sort of tuning into your inner child in a way, isn't it? Because
Oh, yeah.
that joy and that liveliness, and that's why when children play and have imaginative play with laughter, and they don't think about how they move, they sort of just tumble around and just let their bodies do what they want. And yet as adults we can become quite restricted in our movement, we become inhibited perhaps by how people see us and so on. And yet when we, as you say, tune into that laughter, I think we forget all that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And we
It, it's one of the good things about having stairs in a household. When I built my little house, I have my upstairs as my bedroom, but it was important. Now I can't go up the stairs right now, but I mean, yeah, I'm 103. I have a right to. Anyway, but the stairs, the business of climbing is what children love to do. They climb trees, they climb stairs, they climb. And they have to climb back down again unless there's somebody there to help them. But the whole process of going up and down is also moving in the atmosphere. And there's something about that too that we don't quite understand, but our bodies do. Our
yeah.
bodies understand that very well.
Actually, what that is very interesting, because one of my key messages is actually encouraging adults, particularly, to sit on the floor daily, because I really see that the not only the sort of physical benefit of being able to push yourself up off the ground is it's linked with health outcomes and longevity in scientific studies. But also I do believe that, as you're saying, that lifting the whole way from the ground and touching the ground to coming the whole way up to standing, and even further obviously if you want to, is a really sort of natural thing that is really important for our brains. I think it's obviously brilliant for balance. There's all the things that we know, but also I think it helps adults particularly to fear less the distance down to the ground. And I think sometimes as we age, there can be this fear that develops when we're regularly at chair height and above and don't sort of allow our bodies to go down further. So that sort of rings true with what you're saying about this concept of going up through the atmosphere in a way.
Yes. And one of the wonderful things about grandchildren is that they drag grandparents onto the floor, you know,
Yes.
and that's great. You know, we are this intergenerational process is a real blessing to us if we pay attention. I was sitting in my uh, recliner chair, and my great granddaughter was here a few months ago, and she's 5, and she was walking around the room and doing her thing, and all of a sudden I feel little fingers up the back of my neck. It was the sweetest thing. I was just sitting there, not just being enjoying what I saw her doing. And then I feel these little tiny fingers climbing up the back of my neck. It was the sweetest thing ever.
You have 5 generations alive in your family at the moment. You have
Right.
great grandchildren as
Yeah.
well, which is really quite something, and so lovely for them as well. I'm
Yeah.
sure. And you all through your book as well, you're always talking about humor, and you talked about giggling before, tickling the diaphragm, and when people become a little bit stuck and blocked in their lives, it's a really useful tool, isn't it, to be able to focus in on the funnier side of life, to be able to shift that perspective that you talk about.
Yeah. Look for humor. If you don't look for it, you don't see it. But if you're looking for humor, people are funny. They really are. And we're funny. We say funny things sometimes. You know, I'll say something and my kids will crack up, and I think it's funny, but the fact that they in their 70s can think it's funny is very nice.
Absolutely. So one of the things I wanted to talk to you about was also comparison. I think that in this information era, if you want to call it that, especially around in my subject area, exercise and movement, but also in general health and wellness, there's almost becoming a sort of negative competitive side of the world, where people are sort of comparing with others about those things. How do you see comparison, and when do you think that comparison becomes harmful?
I think they become harmful when the comparison is used as judgment, because we have no, my mother had a saying, there's so much good in the worst of us and so much bad in the best of us. It hardly behooves any of us to talk about the rest of us. So
That's
I
great.
come in complaining about my brother, and she would say, there's so much good in the worst of it. And I would mouth it after her because
You'd
I
heard it so many times.
knew what she was saying. But it's true.
Hmm.
If all you look for is the bad in another person, all you're going to see is the bad in that other person. And all you're going to encourage is the bad in the other person. And the same thing with children. If all you see is what they're doing wrong and you're constantly correcting them, they're going to think that life is there to correct them. Life is there to encourage them to be who they are. And sometimes they need correction, but a lot of times they just need encouragement. And so it's taking life in into the light and not into the darkness. And
Yeah.
if you have done something that you're kind of ashamed of, or that you are ashamed of, and so you're always looking over your shoulder at what that was, you're going to get a stiff neck. But if you can understand, it's like I had my 99th birthday, and I was coming home from the birthday party, and I'm real happy. And I come to the grocery store and I have my stuff in the cart, and an elderly gentleman comes up and says to me, he sees me with my cart and I'm ready to put the things in my car. And he says, "Oh, may I help you?" And I said, No, I can do this by myself. And he says, he stands up straight and he says, "Well, I'm 86 years old." And I'm standing there beside him. And, "Well, I'm 99. And I march off and get into the car. And I sat down on my seat and I started to laugh. And then I started to say, "You nasty old woman, you get up and go into that grocery store and find that man and apologize." So I'm beating myself up for it. And all of a sudden I start laughing. And I thought, no, this is two kindergarten people. I'm bigger than you are. I said, but then I got thinking, he's going to go home and he's going to say to his wife, "Some nasty old woman came in and and they'll get to laughing about it. It'll be totally funny." I said, this is to myself, this is a really comedy piece. And I sat in my car and I couldn't even get my car started. I was laughing so hard because, the actual ridiculousness of the whole thing was so wonderful.
And well, and when we, it's terrible when we have that sort of comparison with others, when it becomes judgment. But what about when that judgment is on yourself and you're, for example, comparing to a past version of yourself or comparing to a future person you think you should be? Where do you think people can go with that?
Oh, you can get stuck. You can really get stuck in the things that you have condemned yourself for and never forgiven yourself for. Those are really things that are hard to let go of. If you have helped, if somebody you love has been hurt by something you've done. I mean, these are things that happen in life, and you have to be able. You don't have to. The key is to be able to forgive yourself for that, and so it's a matter of working with that and realizing that we make mistakes, and sometimes the mistakes can be corrected, and sometimes they can't be corrected. Sometimes they're just there. They're mistakes. You can't erase them. And if you spend all your time trying to erase them, you're not going anyplace. But if you can let them go, my mother's symbol was, in fact, my sister and I were in our 90s when we realized we'd be talking and we'd do this and we'd say, and all of a sudden we both said, "Why do we do that?" And we both laughed and we said, "Oh, Kuch Parwani," which was my mother's symbol of when something was just not worth spending more time about, or, it's just something that's there. You can say, "Oh, it's not important," which in Hindustani was Kuch Parwani. So we'd be talking, and we'd "Oh, Kuch Parwani," and we'd go on with what we were talking about. It's allowing some things that if you give it energy and get stuck in a place, that it may not be worth doing that. It may be much more important for you to say, "Okay, let's let that one go because it's not getting us anyplace." And I think every one of us have found places where we've been stuck with something that either we did wrong or someone else did wrong, and it's a sore place. And if we keep pulling that back up again and looking at it and say, "Yeah, that's a bad place," it stays a bad place. But if it gives us proper place in the world scheme of things and say, oh, kuch balwani, and let it go, it will drop off and be gone, and you won't even, and you'll forget about it. Because my sister and I don't even remember what it was that we were kuch balwani.
Yeah. And that's the best bit of evidence that it didn't matter because you've moved past. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what about when it's fear? So a lot of my clients come to me and their bodies are not in as bad shape as they think. They are moving better than they think. They're seeing their movement more negatively, and it usually comes from a place of fear because of an event or something that has limited them and made them fearful of being able to move more and move forward.
Well, those things happen. They happen with children. if a parent is afraid of climbing trees, they may be yelling at their kids, "Don't climb trees. You're going to fall and hurt yourself." The child may have been afraid of trees because if we've yelled at our kids and said, "Don't climb trees," they're not going to climb trees. And then they're going to miss the fun of being able to climb trees. It's that we as parents have the responsibility of helping our children find what's scary in life and what isn't. And so let's reclaim the independence that we can have and that we can teach our children if we allow ourselves to really feel the way it feels to be able to do some of these things.
Yeah, because it's also so liberating when we do, because we might then connect with that feeling of joy. We might find that
Yeah,
inner child. We might find that playfulness that
right.
then opens up our awareness to the potential of what we actually can do and that we've perhaps been holding ourselves back from.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And listen to what we say to our kids, or listen to what we hear other people say to their children. Take notice of how we treat children. I have a lovely little story. My I guess he's yeah, grandchild is 5, Ian, and he and 2 other little people were standing around a dish in their Sunday school class, and they had put their nickels and dimes in it. And because they were going to send this money to somebody who didn't have the money to dig a well, okay? I mean, this is what they're doing. And so they put the money in, and the little girl says, they're 5. I mean, this is a story my grass told me. So they're 5. And the little girl says, should we pray? And the little boy standing next to her says, I don't know. And Ian, who is 5, he stands up and he says, of course we pray. He says, God's all around us. Let us pray. So, it's that kind of ability to stand up for, of course we pray. Because he heard his family say things like that, or somebody else, I don't know. But here he is. The teacher heard it.
And he's become a teacher too. That's incredible.
Yeah.
So one of the chapters in your book is about choice. And you say that there's always something we can do. We can choose to respond. We have a choice about whether we focus on the fear or move towards love, as you talk about, and that we can choose if we're seized up. when someone hears that, but they don't really understand how they can make that choice, or they feel that that's something that's just not open to them, how would you help someone to be able to make that choice?
Well, sometimes just talking to them about it helps them. Sometimes they get it. Sometimes I've had to say to them, well, maybe you should dream about it. Maybe you should pay attention to your dreams about such and such. Or if it's something that uh, I feel they were focusing on the negative, or I ask them about what they read or what they watch or on TV, point them towards the light. If you're working with somebody who is stuck in a dark place, see what you can do to point them towards the light. But it takes thinking about that and working with it. And as you do, you find out with that person what it is that can do that. But it's a matter of where, if we're trying to help somebody, where it is that we're trying to point them, whether we're pointing them towards the light or towards the darkness. And I know a lot of uh, counseling goes towards trying to help them eliminate the stuff that they have going on in their life. And that's probably very important. And but sometimes in trying to do that, you concentrate on it and it makes it harder. Whereas if you mention it and then go on into what it is that is a lighter, more um, um, movable spot, and you go into that, it's like if I tell a person to go home and rest, and they think that I've said, go home and do nothing, that's not true. I told them to go home and rest. That's doing something. So if the doing something is important and it seems like you don't understand that, pay attention to it and see what it's really saying.
It resonates with me about pain, because when I was in this chronic pain cycle, as I now look back on it, at the time I didn't see it as a cycle, I saw it as my existence, and I couldn't separate out the pain from me, as it were. Um, and you talk about sort of not focusing on the dark. And for me, that was the pain.
Yeah.
And if I just read a little line from your book, you say, our brain feels as though it's in a loop sometimes, because it actually is. We found a well trodden neural pathway and dug in deep. And that was, reading that line was very liberating for me in a way, because it was exactly what happened to me. And I can see that retrospectively. And for me, the point, probably the halfway point between really not getting any better and really getting very low and miserable, was the point that I realized I had to give up those emotions. I had to start looking towards accepting what was happening to me in order to allow me to move on. I started to have an upward trajectory, and I started to realize that I had to be looking forward and accept the position that I was in. And that feeling of the future, it being a permanent thing. You'll laugh when you hear this, because I've told you before, I've just turned 50, but I felt I was 40 at the time, and I felt like I was 80. Now, I don't know what it feels like to be 80, and you're 103, but I felt like I was in a body that I hadn't expected at the time, because I was in so much pain and was so immobile so suddenly. And yet that shift, as you talked about before, where I made the choice, in a way, a subconscious choice, I think, move forward. And I talked about the brain, that quote that I just mentioned, sorry, about the brain feeling like it gets into a loop sometimes because it's in a well-trodden neural pathway, uh, shows us that sometimes it's a physical thing that is happening, and but that we can choose to move out of it sometimes.
Right. Yes, I agree. And I think probably most of us have had times when we've been stuck in a place that we didn't think we could get out of. But if we could look at the parts that we could let go of it, and maybe we don't have to let go of the whole thing all at once, maybe we do. But whatever it is, there's a letting go of the part that hurts and looking for what doesn't.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, yes, you also mention in your book when even when someone is in a really terrible situation with where they may have lost a lot of movement or suffered injury, focusing on the things that they can do, the parts they can move, even if it is a wiggle of a finger,
Yeah,
focusing on that. You talked before, I listened to your wonderful podcast with Dr. Chatterjee, who I am a big fan of as well. Um, and on that, you talked about the fact that you have issues with your eyesight, you have issues with your hearing, but and yet you still are out there. I've seen riding your trike in your garden
yeah,
and walking around because you choose to keep moving, regardless of the negatives perhaps that you could see in your life.
yeah. And I became aware of the fact that though my eyesight has diminished, my insight has gotten better. That I can understand things that I didn't understand before. That's helped. Yeah. And when I had a real big thing like my husband asked for a divorce, and I had a breakdown that was really terrible. I was in my car driving home to an empty house. I was screaming and yelling, and I was so broken and so nasty and so awful and all this in the car by myself. It was a long drive back down the I-10 to my home. And all of a sudden I pulled over to the side of the road and I opened the door and looked in and looked out. And I thought, oh my, ooh, that inside of that car was horrible. The stuff that I had been yelling at was like it was stuck in there, and it was just awful, terrible. It was, and I thought, oh, am I going to live the rest of my life like that? And I thought, no, but what? Yeah, and then the words came into my mind. This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. And there's my name. And I thought, whoa, this is really something. And so I said, no, not, I'm not taking you stuff back. You will air the car out and do this. And I went back to my home and I talked to my dog and explained what we were doing. And the next morning I went into town and changed my license plate to be glad,
Ah,
because
brilliant.
I realized that my name was there and I could see it, And now every time I got into my car, I had to look at that. Be glad. Okay. And I get in the car. And then I realized that everybody in behind me who is in the line would see that, be glad. So it was not only me being glad, but spreading it around. So
It was a ripple effect.
yes, yes. So for 60 years after that, I had that license plate.
I love that. Every time I hear the phrase "be glad," I'm going to think of you, and I'm going to,
Yeah,
and it's short for "be Gladys." Think
yes.
like Gladys. Oh, I
Well,
love that. That's
you want to laugh? I have a real good friend. She has a pigeon that lives in her tree, and this pigeon she's named Gladys.
why.
Well, that pigeon comes to her window in the morning and pecks on the window, and then they have a conversation.
Oh, funny. That's very unusual.
Isn't that fun? I love
Yeah,
I love the way people take things that make joy and happiness out of
it
something that's nothing, but it's really fun.
it is, it is, and what a compliment as well. That's so lovely. So, the final subject I'd like to talk to you about is, your phrase "aging into health." Obviously, you are at the incredible age of 103. Um, and there's a lot of focus at the moment on longevity, and in theory, extending life. And yet, I love the Abe Lincoln saying, it's not about the years in your life, it's about the life in your years. And I really think that's the secret to one of the secrets to aging well, is about how you live those years, and then that's what brings your health span.
Right.
And I've heard you talk about the fact that you've got a 10-year plan. So, do you always set goals for yourself?
Oh, yeah. I'm calling it aging into health, not longevity. Longevity, it just, ah, you know, so what? But aging into health, now that's looking forward to something. And so I have a 10-year plan. Why not?
Yeah,
I could make it 12 if I wanted to, but let's stick with 10 for a while.
yeah,
And it's I looking forward to um, village for living medicine, where the people who live in this village are people who want to live,
yeah.
and they want to live their lives to the fullest. So it's that kind of a reach towards the light and not towards the darkness.
Absolutely. And making plans that can help you to continue to fill your purpose. Now, we haven't talked a lot about purpose today, and yet, it's a really important part of your message. And finding that for me was through the work that I do now. I found some purpose in being a mother, absolutely, but there was something else that I needed to do. And so I'm lucky that I can now look back at my pain years as a gift. They didn't feel like a gift at the time by any means, but I now realize they were, because they have brought me to do what I do, which I love. And I believe in the message of spreading the message of how important movement is, and to find joy in movement again is
Right.
the is my purpose. And so, what you talk about purpose, do you feel that you've always been in touch with your purpose all your life?
Well, in some way or another, yes. Because when when my sister and I played with dolls, she wouldn't let me play with hers because they got sick. My dolls got sick and were in the hospital or something. But her dolls, if I played with them, they got sick. So I wasn't allowed to play with her dolls. It was that kind of a thing. So no, I really, well, my daughter, who's my partner in medicine, has been right along. When she was 2, and my husband was a doctor too, she came and stood up instead of in front of us, and she looks up and she says, Last time when I was a doctor, I was a daddy doctor, not a mommy doctor. And I said, well, ooh la la.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Sometimes we come into a certain place knowing this lifetime, this is the work we've got to do. And sometimes we don't find it, or we don't. In my case, I had to find my own voice when I was 93. I didn't really trust my own voice. I knew what I had to do. I knew what I was doing and all of that. But I was constantly questioning until I was 93.
So what happened at 93 that shifted that then?
I had a dream. And I was really, for years, I've paid attention to my dreams. In this dream, actually, I woke up laughing and singing and realized that the dream was I was 9 years old in India, coming out of the tent because we were in the jungle and it was a Sabbath morning. But in our family, on the Sabbath morning, we weren't allowed to sing anything but hymns and bhajans. And I thought that was stupid. And I was 9 years old and I knew what I wanted to do. And so I looked out of the tent. My brother wasn't there because he would have tattled on me and I'd been in trouble. But he wasn't there. So I ran as fast as I could up the tree, right up to the top of the mango tree. And I'm sitting there and I'm singing. I'm singing any old caterpillar song or whatever I wanted to sing. But every so often, I'd look over my shoulder and Jesus was in the tree with me. And I look over and I say, oh, Jesus loves the little children, right? And Jesus is laughing. And he says, yes. So then I go back to my singing and then I think, did he really say yes? And I go back and I look and I say, I'm still a little children, right? And he said, yes. And so I go back to my singing and I was laughing and I woke up. So it was a time that I was saying to myself, well, if Jesus thinks you're okay, you can accept that and go on and trust your own voice. And so from that point on, I really didn't have to question everything that I was writing and saying and talking about. I accepted the fact that really I could accept my own voice. But it took me a long time. I'm a slow learner.
93, that's amazing. But now you're singing it from the rooftops. You're singing your message out loud.
Oh, yeah.
And you're singing across oceans. We're literally an ocean apart. Your message is round the world, which is truly fantastic. And you have a wonderful book as something that I know that I will be rereading several times. Obviously, with those types of books, you read it at one stage and you take one message or two messages, and then you read it another time in your life and you take another message. So it's like something that you can rely on to keep coming back to get the wisdom and so on, which is a wonderful gift to the world.
Well, it actually works for me.
It really is incredible. I have huge respect for your work that you've done. You've achieved so much in your life, but also for bringing that voice to us, for sharing your wisdom, because you're benefiting so many people, and that's really important work. And it's something that I need to listen to myself. I think lots of people will take very different things from this conversation, but hopefully, I am sure it will have touched everyone in different ways. So all I can say is a massive thank you for giving me your time. And I've really, really enjoyed this conversation.
thank you for helping me spread what I think is the truth.
It is, absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you.
I hope you've enjoyed listening, and if you have, you can help by doing 3 things. First, press the follow button to tell podcast platforms you want to listen again. Second, please give the show a 5-star rating and leave a review about why you liked it. And third, I'd love you to share it with friends and family or on your socials, for which I'm truly thankful. Finally, if this podcast is making you want to start reclaiming your own movement, join me in the Reclaim Movement membership for classes, both live and by replay, and countless videos of mini movement breaks to add into your daily life, covering practical and fun, important natural movements. Visit reclaimmovement.co.uk/membership to get started with your 7-day free trial. See you for the next episode, and thank you so much for listening.